Hi, my name is Damon Brown of DamonBrown.net. I'm into helping you as a solopreneur, as a side hustler, or as any type of non-traditional entrepreneur. Today we're talking about Mark Cuban, the famous guy over on Shark Tank, and before that, a really popular VC. And we're talking about why he says you should not take money from him. Now, I actually like Mark Cuban because he's such a contrarian. He seems like a cool guy. I appreciate his arguments. And this is actually what he said on a podcast. Let me get the quote right for you. Sweat equity is always the best equity. The next best version is customer equity, where you get the customer coming in, buying from you, and that's how you're funding your growth. Third is using a Kickstarter / Indiegogo. The last thing on the list is venture capital money. They aren't giving it to you for charity. And the minute that you take that money, that's not the end, but when the obligations really start. You thought you had an obligation to grow your company before you took the money. You have no idea. In other words, the obligations really start when you take somebody else's money. She bootstrapped both of my companies. The second one, called Cuddler, ended up getting acquired. We ended up making a profit on it. And because we bootstrapped it, the money came straight to us. Ended up being a wonderful experience. I talk about that in the bestseller. Some of y'all might know, The Bite-Sized Entrepreneur. A little bit more and Bring Your Worth. Gotta get the right side here. And in the new book, Built From Now, I talk about it a lot because it's talking about how to maximize your resources when you don't have much. If you're bootstrapping, you gotta maximize your resources. Get any of these books, or particularly the new book, gets to the nitty-gritty and gives you a framework to do that. And when you take other people's money, which I saw a lot of my colleagues and friends do, then it changes the game. There's 3 reasons why he said what he said. And it's actually against what he's doing because he's a venture capitalist. So I love the contrarian thing, but it also comes from a place of service and honesty. He's bootstrapped before, so he knows the deal. There's 3 reasons why he's saying that. Number 1, delaying venture funding forces you to prove your concept earlier. What I mean is that if you don't have somebody giving you money, then you're gonna have to figure it out. And that means doing minimal viable products, which means, you might know the Silicon Valley idea of doing something as simple as possible with bubble gum and duct tape, putting it together, getting it to your customers as soon as possible, getting feedback, fixing it again, making it better, iterating as we call it, and doing it again, and doing that cycle until the customer is satisfied and then you're able to expand. And of course that customer will get word of mouth going, and then you'll get a buzz, and then hopefully it will get to a certain level where ideally people start paying you. You have to get there faster if you're bootstrapping. Now, in our case with my previous startup that I did on my own, So Quotable, I bootstrapped that and I was completely a solo founder, or with my one that got acquired, Cuddler, we had to figure out how to serve the customer because our main thing wasn't necessarily profit at the beginning. In fact, that was pretty low on it. Our main thing was virality, so getting as many people on there. If you're doing an app called Cuddler, which connected people for hugs, kind of like a matchmaking service, you can't have one person on Cuddler. It's like having one person on Twitter. Who are they going to tweet at? Who's going to read their tweets, right? Seth Godin has great rants about this if you end up checking out his Akimbo podcast. He has really good discussions about this. But you need to have other people. So our main currency wasn't financial. Our main currency was capital, social capital. So getting people to connect. And luckily we had 250,000 users around the time we got acquired. So we understood that, right? You have to figure that out if you don't have somebody lining your pockets. Now, I'm good friends with VCs. VCs are cool with me. Again, like I said, I love Mark Cuban. Nothing wrong with that. Just understand the deal that you're getting into, which is why I appreciate his honesty. It's one of the reasons why I like him. If you do not have the extra money coming in and someone's saying, okay, here's $1 million in the bank, roll with it, then you can go ahead and play with this, play with that, play with that. If you're bootstrapping and you're literally taking your wallet out and funding the thing, you have to work quickly. I didn't say sloppily, but quickly. And that changes your mindset. I think he's talking about that. It gets you into a higher level of, as we say nowadays, grinding, where it's like, okay, we have to make this work. Let's get serious about this. If you got that financial runway, you can dilly-dally a little bit more. You can spend money and try to fix things with money that actually should be fixed in different ways. Number 1, the venture capital part, you get proof of concept earlier. Number 2, you avoid looking at venture capital or venture funding as a goal. I have a column with Inc. magazine, but I don't mind throwing them in the mix. Inc., Forbes, Entrepreneur, whatever magazine, whatever website, you know your favorite websites, we tend to glorify those that make a new round of funding. This person got $100 million in funding for their startup. Now their startup was worth $5 billion. That sounds amazing. I'm throwing numbers out. They don't make any sense. But follow me. They got a $100 million investment on a $5 billion valuation, whatever. They end up getting that. That's cool. Mark, as he said in this interview, was saying, no, that's not cool, because now this company, I'm talking about a founder, he or she owns this outside entity $100 million, right? And so whatever projections they have, whatever creating they were doing, now the focus has to be on growth and either making a ton of profit or getting acquired for a ton of money. When a venture capitalist gives you money, their goal is to 10x it at minimum. That means if a venture capitalist is giving you $100 million for a piece of your company, then whenever they exit, which means you exit, like when my company got acquired, whenever you exit or whatever profit or whatever, however it works, however you make that money, they're expecting to be $1 billion out. They give you $100 million, they're expecting $1 billion to come back. Remember that. Obviously, he knows that because he's been a venture capitalist for probably my whole career. He's been a venture capitalist for a while, so he knows the deal. He's been really honest about warning us about that. And we're glorifying that as opposed to someone like myself or another person who might be bootstrapping and actually having paying customers. I couldn't talk to you as a coach, as a public speaker, as a book author, if people weren't paying me money to actually feed my family and take care of my home. So I am proof of concept. You know, shout out to Joe Budden to saying that. I talk about his Spotify TIFF in another video that I'll be sure and link over here. But do you understand what I'm saying? When you're doing this work, you are proof of concept. If you're bootstrapping something and you're making it work and people and customers are paying you, you are proof of concept. When you have VC backing, you can coast a little bit maybe. But like you said, the real work happens when suddenly you take somebody else's money and you're not working for the customer, you're also working for their expectations. Mark is super clear about that. I so appreciate his interview. So number one, if you end up delaying venture funding, then you can actually get to your proof of concept faster. Number two, you avoid looking at venture funding as a goal. It is not a goal. No. Your goal is to have a thriving business. If venture capital, VC funding or whatever helps get you there, cool. But your goal shouldn't be VC funding. Because then you get the VC funding, if you're lucky enough to get the funding, the first thing they're going to ask you is, well, what's your vision for the company? You're back to square one. What's your vision? How are you going to take care of your customer? How are you serving this world? They're going to ask that if they're good VCs. But if they're silly and they just give you the money, then they're still going to have those expectations later. They're just not going to warn you about it. So know that up front. Number three, funding should be a last resort. He broke it down. Let me make sure I got it straight. Sweat equity is the number one thing. That's what bootstrapping is. That's what he's talking about, sweat equity. That means putting in the time. That means putting in the energy. I break it down and build from now. You put in the focus, the agility, the time, and the energy. That's why it's called Build From Now. It's available now. You know, you take the quiz at buildfromnowquiz.com, and learn more about your own particular resources. But we have the resources. That's called sweat equity. When people say, oh, I put my blood and sweat into it, that's what they mean. That means you see it's dark over here. That means staying up late nights and handling this and doing this as opposed to going straight for the funding. So number one, the best thing is sweat equity. That also means that you get to reap the rewards if you have some success and you don't have to split up that pie or be beholden to someone else who gave you some money. Number one is sweat equity. Number two is customer equity, when your customers are actually helping to fund whatever you're doing. And that might be pre-sale things, that might be enough customers as I have to thrive, and so you don't need to get outside money or funding. It's like you're just taking care of whatever you're taking care of. The third thing would be to do, as he talked about, a crowdsourcing, where it's a Indiegogo or Kickstarter. But the last resort should be venture capitalism. Venture capitalism, the whole thing, venture capitalists. And doing that, again, I have venture capitalists in my network that I love and I adore, and I think they're doing great work. That should not be your first exit, though, at all. No pun intended. But that should not be your first exit. Your first should be that sweat equity. What can you do, again, build from now with the resources you got? That second resort is the customer equity, where you're actually asking customers and getting it flowing as far as with those sales. The third resort, if you can't get those sales going, is to do a campaign where you're literally asking for money for pre-sales and things of that nature. And the last resort should be venture capitals. And that's because, again, you're beholden to someone else. And you have to take care of that master, pardon my pun, you have to take care of that master, and you also have to take care of your customers. As Mark Cuban says, that's tough. Listen to Mark Cuban, do not take his money. If you want to get more insight into how you can flex your resources and make an impact in the world, come on over to buildfromnowquiz.com. That's buildfromnowquiz.com. It's based on my new book, Build From Now, How to Know Your Power, See Your Abundance, and Nourish the World. It is a free quiz. It takes 2 minutes. Hundreds of y'all have taken it. It's like 3 or 4 questions, multiple choice, and it'll tell you what your biggest resource is. If you're going to be bootstrapping and doing your thing, you need to take this quiz. So come through. Again, it's free. It's my way of serving you. Until next time, remember to bring your worth and that you can always build from now. Take care.